what we want to talk about today, this morning, is longer term cycles, and then narrowing those longer term cycles down into shorter term cycles. In other words, we're setting up time windows and then reducing the larger time windows down to smaller time windows so that we can pinpoint when we're going to have major highs and lows in the market in the future. So that's what we're going to be working with today. What I want to do first of all is for you to look at your first sheet in your handout for today, and it says basic structure of the market. And this is the one that we want to look at first of all. Now, to clarify things a little bit for you, on your large sheets that we're not going to look at the moment, just to save time, the large sheets come in series 1, 2, 3, and I think it's just 1, 2, 3, and 4. I might have 4 there. I think you have 4 there. And I have, in talking about this right here, I have said in series 1, I have 1A, 1B, 1C, and I have 1, 2, 3 pages of this. But to clarify it a little bit for yourself, you might want to cross out where I have page 2 and call it 1B, and page 3 and call it 1C, so you don't later on when you get home get confused and start looking at another series, the 3 series, because I'm just basically saying that the 3 pages of the one series right here has these planetary cycles. So page 1A, which you don't need to look at right now, but I'll go into it more as we go on, but just let me cover it and tell you what it's about. It has planetary cycles from 1900 to 1941. 1B has from 1942 to 83, and C has 1983 to 2025. So you have plenty time here and plenty charts to work with cycles, tops and bottoms for markets coming up. So what are the cycles on this one series? The cycles are shown in this particular way. We have conjunctions and oppositions. And so the planets that we're going to look at with the conjunctions and oppositions are listed right here. Neptune and Pluto, Uranus and Pluto, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Neptune, Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Uranus, and Jupiter, Saturn. I have, for the Jupiter, Saturn, I have the heliocentric and the geocentric. So let's go now to your first chart of the new handout, that new handout, which will be the page 1A, which would be your large sheet that you would be looking at, but we're just going to look at this small sheet of it. And this 1A shows you right here on the side, we have the oppositions and the conjunctions of the planets. It tells you which planet is involved. It tells you that it's an opposition and conjunction, and it gives you the whole list of the planets that I just named. And this sheet right here that we're looking at is from 1900, and the actual sheet that you have, the long roll, goes to 1941, but we just have a small section of it on here. What we'll move right down to here is the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which is at the bottom here, this bottom one. And you might just want to take your colored pen, your red colored pen, and mark this cycle, because this cycle, this is the one we're going to be talking about today, is a market cycle that works quite well in markets, that goes from the conjunction, right here it says the conjunction is on the lower side of it, from the conjunction right here, the conjunction, and it goes up, this cycle goes up to the opposition. The opposition is at the top side here. So the opposition is this point right here. And then it comes down again to the conjunction again. So this cycle has the basic cycle of up, and if you will see, that's up from 1900 to 1910, and it will be down from 1910 to 1920. So the reason why I have given all of these cycles, for example, on the other ones, I have gone from the conjunction to the opposition, and I have gone up on that cycle, and I've come down on the other cycle. Now, not all the other planetary combos work where they go up from the conjunction to the opposition and down from the opposition to the conjunction. But the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is a very reliable cycle in doing just that particular thing. So this is what it tells you right here, is that the cycle goes up to this point and down from this point. Now, this is a long-term general cycle, and it's in all a 20-year cycle. We'll come back and talk about it more shortly. But this is a long-term cycle. And so when we're looking at long-term cycles, we have to see what it means in the way of other little cycles fitting in, and we'll come to that as we go along. Now, back to your first sheet in your first page handout. Let's just finish what we're talking about on what this whole page means, and then we'll go on and work with it a little bit. At the bottom of this page, let's just read about it first and then we'll go look at it. At the bottom of the page, we're going to see the aphelion and perihelion of Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. And again, I've given the aphelion the top of the cycle and the perihelion the bottom of the cycle. And for those of you who don't know what an aphelion and perihelion is, the aphelion is the maximum distance of the planet from the sun, and perihelion is the minimum distance. And you have that written on there so you know what it means for future reference. Okay, on your sheet that you have, you will see the cycles again of the aphelion, perihelion, exactly in the same way. So what you have really on these rolls of paper that I've given you is you have years and years of data. And what I do with this data is, for example, I take, when I'm doing my almanac, I look at these sheets for the year. I just look at them all. I put them out on the floor. I look at them all, and I see what cycles am I getting this year, or what cycles am I going to get for next year, because I do my almanac a year in advance. So I can see them all at a glance. This is just to help you see everything at a glance. If you want to look at long-term cycles of the Dow, all you have to do is put your rolls out on the floor, get your long-term Dow chart. You can order them from varying organizations, companies, and just look and you'll quickly see where all these cycles were falling. And so it gives you a real quick look at how to do research in 5 minutes. That's what I like. Is there something I can see there? If it is, then I want to go in and research it in more detail. Okay, on your chart that you have, the aphelion, perihelion, you'll notice that those cycles of Pluto and the outer planets don't happen very often. So when they do happen, it's an important thing. You will notice that as we look at that on this particular chart right here. As you can see, I have really nothing much listed in here. And it's only as we get down to Jupiter and Mars that we begin to get a lot of activity. But the outer planets, when it does happen, for example, we had Pluto at the aphelion last in 1886. But, you know, when these things do happen, then you want to pay attention to them. And you'll have them on your sheets. Neptune, perihelion, aphelion comes in pairs. And the last one we had was in 1959 and 1968. And so these are marked so you can see what happens with those. Uranus was in 1925. And so these are not very active, but when they happen in your lifetime, you want to pay attention. And so we're always interested in what the cycles are then for the 1998 period that we're looking at right now. So let's look at that. It's your next sheet that you'll have in there, which will be your sheet that gives you 1984 to 2025. That next little sheet, if you can find that. And so right away, I have marked in here on red 1998. And this is where these cycles are in 1998. And you can see right away we have no major cycles in 98 up here. Nothing's really happening in 98. It's kind of in the middle of everything. 1997, we had a bottom of a cycle here of the Jupiter-Uranus cycle right around the first of the year. But these time windows are 2 to 3 months in operation on these outer planets. It's not a absolutely on the dot. The planets down here give you, the Mars aspects give you the tighter windows. So these are wide windows. So in 1997 we had 2 cycles bottomed, and we got a bottom in the spring, and these cycles were involved in that. In 2000, you see again here we've got cycles coming in. 2000 we have the Jupiter-Pluto cycle coming in, and we also have the Jupiter-Saturn cycle coming in. So that's very, very important. So 2000 then is a very important year for us to be paying attention to where major long-term cycles are concerned. So you have this on your sheets, and you can be able to see it with it in the comfort of your own home, see it at your leisure when you unroll them and take some time to work with them. When we move down to the bottom here for the aphelion and perihelion cycles, we have nothing again shown right here in 98. In 98, we do have, at the end of 98, we have the Mars aphelion occurs in December of 98. So that's our only cycle in December shown on these charts. And then in 99, we have one occurring, Mars perihelion, in November. And we also have the Jupiter in May of 99. So these are the cycles then that we will be combining into our work for the 98, 99, and 2000 period that we're going to be talking about today. So it becomes very quick and easy for you to see where these cycles are. Now the next question that we want to ask is on your page 3 of your major handout here, we have how did W.D. Gann predict the crash? And of course everybody's interested in that, and could you have done the same thing? And I talked about this in last year, and we're going to go over quite a bit of the material right here that we went over last year, and then we'll talk about what's going to happen coming up. Well, the reason W.D. Gann, first of all, was able to predict these cycles was because he studied past patterns. And he saw clearly that there were strong patterns that coincided with tops and bottoms on the Dow. He used the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which it tells you about right here. And from the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, he predicted the general trend of the Dow Jones. And he used the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions that we've just looked at on our long-term chart. He used these conjunctions because he knew these conjunctions gave a time window for major bottoms in the Dow Jones. So if you're looking at the major time window for this long-term cycle, because the conjunctions occur every 20 years, the time window on this is 1 year either side of the conjunction. It's not right on it, but it's 1 year either side. So within 1 year either side of the conjunction, you're going to see a major low of the market. What happens basically, and this is what we talked about yesterday, is that during the Jupiter part of the cycle, the market becomes overvalued. It goes up, it expands, and it becomes overvalued. Saturn comes into the market then, and the market then becomes undervalued. By the time you get the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the market is undervalued. It's very low, and people want to buy. And then as you go up to the opposition between the two planets, you get to the point where Jupiter is very strongly in effect, and the market is overvalued. And you have another top, and it comes down. So what we basically have here is, as this bottom paragraph points out to you in your material, you have a 10-year cycle of conjunction to opposition where the market is going up, and then you have a 10-year cycle of opposition to conjunction where the market is going down. Now that's a large and long-term cycle, and other cycles fit into this. So on your next sheet, it tells you, right here, we just go over the ones that we had in this century, which are the 20-year cycles of conjunctions. We had in 1901, 1921, 1940, 1961, 1981, and the next conjunction will come in 2000. So 2000 then says that conjunctions give major bottoms, and so 2000 would be a major bottom cycle. Between the 20-year cycle of the overall cycle of Jupiter-Saturn, you have the 10-year cycles that we've been talking about, the 10-year cycles from the conjunction to the opposition. And these dates are also listed right here. And I won't go through them. You can look at them yourself. I won't go through them because the reason why we have 3 or 4 dates on each one, and it's all within a year time frame, is because Jupiter goes retrograde. And the retrograde Jupiter goes back and forth over Saturn, and it causes these kinds of several times during that period that we have an opposition. So, but we have a time window during that period of time for a top. So we can use this information just like W.D. Jeanne did for us to predict out into the future. So just to recap then, we have a 20-year cycle, and within that 20-year cycle, we have a 10-year cycle. And the 10-year cycle in itself is very, very similar to the 20-year cycle. For example, we have, if we would just draw it out, which you can do, and so that you get the feeling of what we're talking about, let's say this is 20 years right here. And we have a 20-year cycle that goes like this. Now, within that 20-year cycle, we also have a 10-year cycle that we're going to talk about. And this 10-year cycle says the market goes up, and it comes down, and the market goes up, and it comes down. So you have 2 things happening here. You have a 10-year cycle within a 20-year cycle. And when these cycles come together at the end of the 20-year cycle and the end of the 10-year cycle, those periods of time can be very, very important, because a 20-year cycle ends and a 10-year cycle ends. Here, a 20-year cycle doesn't end, only a 10-year cycle ends, okay? So we have this kind of thing that we're going to be working with today to see how we can predict what's coming up in the coming years. Now, before we go on to predictions for the next several years, let's look at what W.D. Jeanne found out. In looking at these cycles, he said, and this is now getting into his 10-year cycle, he said you could even during this 10-year cycle break down the years of what's going to be happening. Now, this information is pretty common knowledge, and I believe Jeanne put it in one of his courses. This is pretty common knowledge, but it was based on planetary cycles, which is very important. So he said that years ending in 1, like 1901 or 1991, or years like 1919 ends in a 1, these are years of recovery from major lows. Because you see, our Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions for the last couple of hundred years have been falling right around the turn of the decade, like the 1901, 1921, the 20 years you get these conjunctions. So this is the reason why he was able to set this up, and it's a pretty regular cycle, so that hasn't changed very much even to today. So he could say very much then that years ending in 1 were years of recovery after the conjunction, because the conjunction came just shortly before the 1 year and the market crashed to a low. And so we had major moves up. Years ending in 2 are generally down. Years ending in 3 can be up or down depending on other cycles. Years ending in 4 are down years. Years ending in 5 are up years. Years ending in 6 are up years. Years ending in 7 are down years. And we had the down this year in the October period. We had the down in March, April period that we'll get into how that all happened. But the rest of the year has been up because other overriding cycles have forced this year up. But still, the most important time of any year is the September to November period for it to fall down. So in 7 years and 4 years And 1 years and 9 years, those years, the September to October period is very, very, very tricky. And if you, well, I'll come to that in a minute. I won't get into that right now. Let me just go through this. Years ending in 8 or 9 are generally tops. So we're coming at 1998, we're coming into a top year. So this year, we're moving into the market prices should be going up during that period of time. We're not talking about how high it should go up right now, but we're saying the general trend should be up. The year ending in 9 are the strongest year of the cycle, and it's usually a blow-off, and this is before we get into the conjunction, which of course comes in 2000, so you get the blow-off cycle in the 9 year, and then you go back up here to the years ending in 1, and you get the recovery again. So 2001, you start a recovery. So 1997 has not necessarily fit this as being a down year all year, but we've had the down parts of it, and we had a big jump down during this year, which is 7 year. 1987 was the big down. 1937 was a big down. Look at the 7 years, you will see. Just get charts of the down, just go back and look, and you will see that these cycles are pretty accurate. Okay, Jeanne also said that if you took 20-year chunks of the market and overlaid them, so let's say, for example, you took 1900 to 1920, and then you took 1920 to 1940, and you put these two charts over each other, one above the other, and I'll show you how we're doing that shortly, then you would see a similar pattern during those 20 years. He also said if you took chunks of 10 years, and just let's say you took, 1900 to 1910, 1910 to 1920, 1920 to 1930, and just cut out those chunks of the market and just laid them down and just looked at them all one on top of the other, you would see a great similarity. That's how he got his year 1 does this, year 2 does that, year 3 does the other, because he's looking at those chunks of the market. He's looking at a 10-year time frame, comparing a 10-year time frame of 1900 to 1910 with a 10-year time frame of 1910 to 1920. So I find that for you, you'll probably find this to be the very best thing, to compare the 10-year chunks. The 20-year chunks you might have a little bit more difficulty with, although it works beautifully, but the 10-year chunks are very clear to see. So if you will do that, make a project, go home, get a long-term chart, cut it up into 10-year segments, paste it down where each segment is one over the other, and look at the similarity. You will see 7 years are down, 4 years are down, 5 years are up, 8 years are up, 9 years are up, with regularity all during that period. So this is a very, very important thing, and this is one of the ways he made his predictions. Other larger term things that Jeanne looked at, larger term cycles at work, was looking at his 60-year cycle. And this is important to pay attention to, because it helps you predict certain things that otherwise you could make a grave error on. And the 60-year cycle is still using the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, but if you look at this particular wheel, for example, you will see that if we start out here with this particular Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, look over on your wheel and you'll see you have a number 1 in that segment. And if you look at that, and then if you go over here and you find the number 2 in this segment, and if you join those lines together right there between those two, and then you go over here and find the number 3, and you join the number 3 line together, and then you go back to where you started at number 1, you've got almost a perfect triangle. You've got like this, a 1, 2, 3. And this cycle, and this is a pattern right here showing the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions over a 40-year period, and look at what a beautiful pattern it makes. You see, the thing about nature and the thing about the solar system is that it's all in harmony. And I know Thomas talked a lot about this. to you. And so you begin to see how this all works when you look at this kind of pattern. And this is the reason why we have to look at patterns in the markets, because patterns work out just as beautifully. But this is 3 20-year segments, so that makes 60 years. So in 60 years, you've gone from this point all the way around and you're back in this area again. So that's the 60-year cycle that Jeanne was looking at. Interestingly enough, in these 60-year cycles, you have some interesting numbers, because in the 60 years, Saturn goes around twice, because it takes 30 years approximately for it to make a complete cycle from beginning, let's say, in Aries to get back to Aries again. It takes approximately 30 years to make that whole sweep. And so it does it twice during a 60-year cycle. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, during that time, you have 3 Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in a 60-year cycle. And you have 5 Jupiter cycles, because each Jupiter cycle, from Jupiter going, let's say, from 0 Aries all the way around back to 0 Aries, you have 5 Jupiter cycles. So Thomas has talked to you about these numbers. And here again, we're setting up the 2, 3, 5, and we're getting into Fibonacci numbers related to market things and related to planetary things. So this is very, very important, and this is the reason why Robert's tools work so well, because the Fibonacci numbers are very, very prominent in everything that we're doing. Okay, so how did Jeanne use this 60-year cycle to confirm a larger fall in the Dow than normal in 1929? Well, what he did, he looked at this 60-year cycle. And what you have to understand here now is 60-year cycles. Since 1802, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions have been falling in Earth signs. And down at the bottom of your chart here, for those who don't know, I've listed all the different combos of signs. We have fire signs, we have earth signs, we have air signs, and we have water signs. So each one of these is a segment in itself. So it says since 1802, the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions have been falling in the earth signs of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Before 1802, they were falling in fire signs. And we could look down, we could see what the fire signs if you want to. Well, appearing, yes, they occur in there. They occur in those signs. They happen in those signs. So what happens is, when a series is changing from, let's say, this changed from a fire sign, it had been occurring in fire signs for 200 years, and now it starts occurring in earth signs. So when a series of, is changing into a new sign, the conjunction comes in a new series, you'll get one conjunction in the new series, and then you'll get the one in the old series. And then once, for example, what happened here was that the first conjunction was in earth signs, then we had a second conjunction that was back in the old fire sign, and then a third conjunction was in earth signs, and from that point on we had earth signs till we're here today. So all of the conjunctions since the early 1800s have been occurring in earth signs, and this has been very, very important. So it says here, following this, all the conjunctions occur in the new series for almost 200 years, and now I give you the example. So we had 1802, that was the first conjunction in the Earth series. It was in Virgo. Then in 1821, we had the last conjunction of the fire series. This was now when we began to have, following this period, all of the conjunctions now totally in Earth. So in 1861, it was in Earth. 1881 is Earth, and 1901 is Earth. Virgo, Taurus, Capricorn, they're Earth signs, and 1921 is an Earth sign, so we're just continuing on with the Earth signs all during that period. And then we have 1940, Taurus, Earth, and 1961, Capricorn, and now, because we're like 200 years from where we started out this series, in December 1980, we had the first one in the next element, which is the air signs. The next one occurred in Libra. So this was in Libra in March of 1980. Now this is important, and this is the reason why I'm going over it with you very carefully. So we had this one falling in Libra, and then we'll have our final conjunction in Earth in the year 2000. May 1928, we have our last conjunction in Earth, which will occur in the sign of Taurus, and following that, all of the conjunctions from that point on for approximately 200 years are going to be in air signs. So, if we took the 60-year cycle then, from the time that we had the 1929 crash, we should have had a big crash in 1989. And so what this is going to explain to you is why we didn't. That's where we're going. Anyway, Jeanne discovered that in the 1861 conjunction was the start of the move up in the Dow, and when the time window came in the 1870 period, after a 9-year bull market, we had a very serious crash, and the crash occurred in 1869. So he had a 9-year up period with a horrendous crash, and so 60 years from this date was the 1929 crash. So we can just go on through and look right down here, and we can see that we had the, let's go back here, we had the Virgo conjunction in 1861 that we've just been talking about. We had another Virgo conjunction in 1921. They both gave you a 9-year up, big up cycle, and they both gave you the big crash. Both those cycles occurred on a 60-year cycle of both of them being in Virgo. So the 60 years after the 1861, when it fell in Virgo again, it was a repeat of a past cycle. And Jeanne was looking at that and said, okay, then we're going to have the repeat of the big crash just before the Jupiter-Saturn cycle comes in. We're going to have the big crash, and he was correct on that. He was the only person that predicted that huge fall in the market. So the question is, what happened when 60 years later in 1989 that we didn't have a big crash in 89? And the very simple thing is that we were looking for, exactly as we show here, we were looking for in 1989 for it to be exactly the same thing that happened in 1869 and in 1929. The start of the whole cycle up, that 9-year up cycle, should have started with a conjunction in Virgo. And what did we get in 1980? This is the start of the 9-year up cycle. This is the start of moving into that big top where you have a crash from it. And do we have a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in Virgo? We didn't get it. Because that time we had started to move out of that Earth cycle, and we hit our first air conjunction of the whole next series. So we did not get the same situation. So we did have a crash in 1989, but it was a very minor thing because we'd had the 1979 before it, and so when it fell, I think it fell 600 points or something in 1989, or maybe 300 points. I've got it written down in here somewhere, but that was no big deal. We weren't too concerned about it because the 1979 had just 1987 had just shocked us so much. So this tells you why we did not have a big crash. But what this also tells you is that starting in the December 1980, when we started these conjunctions in Libra, and on the 7th year of this cycle that started in 1980, the 7th year, which was 1987, the 7th year we had a horrendous crash. So 60 years from this date, when you get into October of 2040, when you have this cycle right here starting again, I would be very concerned, if any of you are around at that time you're going to have this very same pattern happen again. And of course, what we can do is very much, we can tell the kids this because they'll be around at this particular point, just like Jeanne had done. He predicted this crash from around the early 1900s. He predicted the 1929 crash, so far away nobody bothered about it. But now, and this one's so far away, we're not concerned about it. But it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be a repeat of a pattern. And of course, it's not very interesting right now because it's so far away. But we have other things that also confirm these cycles. For example, we have these Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, as we all know who are involved in astrology, also predict the death of a president cycle. And so we have a list here of all the conjunctions in the Earth signs. You have them all listed. And it says all the presidents who come to office during the years ending with a 0 during these Earth signs have died in office. And if you look at the record, you'll find that's exactly correct. The only person who didn't die during office was Reagan. And he was elected on that cycle, but by the time the cycle came in, then we were in an air sign. So that was the only one who did not receive the fatal bullet. And so we've got coming up in 2000, we have the, again, conjunction in Earth signs. So there's a good probability with a history like this behind it that the president who comes into office at that time will either die in office or he will be assassinated. Hmm? Yeah, exactly. And of course the thing is, for all of those who are in astrology, you know that if you look at the chart of whoever comes into office at that time, if you look at the chart, you'll see just exactly when it's going to happen, because it will be easy to pinpoint at that point, because it doesn't happen with each president exactly the same way. Some have died within a month of getting into office, others have died 5 years after into the whole cycle. So it's not quite as simple as it's just immediately. So we can't know that until we see the chart of whoever it is who gets into office. But if I knew anything about astrology and my husband was wanting to run for that, or even I was running for that office, I wouldn't want to do it during this time. I'd say, listen, I think I'll you know. Now the interesting thing is, pardon? Oh, absolutely, run as vice president, because that's the job. You'll be in there like Flynn, you know. Now the interesting thing about this is, and of course we don't know because it's kind of hard to determine, is that Ronald Reagan, you know, Nancy was very involved in astrology. And so the question is, did he not die because she was involved in astrology and she said wear a bulletproof vest all the time, you know, during this period of time? Did he not die because of that? Or did he not die because it was an air sign? And maybe it was some of both, and I don't really know and I can't answer that. But anyway, that was the one that did not pan out here, and there were two differences. She was involved in astrology, and it was in a different sign. So,
there's always the factor that had we not had the medical technology that we had at the time,
exactly.
we might have died from those.
Exactly.
Lincoln did, you know, we could have saved Lincoln.
We could have saved Lincoln, exactly. And that's maybe true, that the wounds could be such that they wouldn't be fatal in future years with the technology that they have. That could be very, very true. And also that we're moving into the air signs after 2000, and that strongly suggests that people who are bringing your point out, Lillian, very clearly, that people who are elected to office during those years in the Earth sign, in the air sign series, would be only injured. And because the medical technology is better. So the air sign series may mean that. We can't tell until we get into it a little bit and see exactly what happens, but we could more predict that than we could predict another death in office. So now to get down to a little bit more tighter range now, looking at these long-term cycles, the 10 and 20-year cycles we've just talked about, we'll get down into something much tighter. And yesterday we talked a lot about Jupiter retrograde. And Jupiter is retrograde once per year. And it is retrograde approximately 5 months and direct approximately 7 months. And these retrograde periods are important. And in 1986, I wrote a book about this, and I talked about how the market during the Jupiter retrograde periods either goes down or sideways, and only very occasionally does it go up during that period of time. In the Jupiter direct periods, the markets more often go up unless some other overwhelming cycle is in there. So looking at this information then, we can say this. For example, if we're in a 9-year at the Jupiter Saturn opposition, or the Jupiter-Saturn, which we're coming up to, if we cut it down into 10-year chunks, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which will occur in 2000. If we're in a 9-year and the Jupiter retrograde occurs during the September to December period of that year, the market will go sharply down. If Jupiter is direct during that period, the market will still go down, but not as much, as the larger cycle could be overriding this Jupiter effect. So the next 9-year we have, of course, is 1999. And in August 25 to December 25, 1999, Jupiter is retrograde. So that falls right in with what we're talking about right there. We've got the retrograde cycle falling in with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. The thing that you have to note about Jupiter-Saturn cycles, and you will note this if you will just take the time to get a long chart of the Dow, cut out those 10-year chunks, and look at them all together, look at them simultaneously, you will see that all Jupiter retrograde periods are not equal. In other words, you'll have 10 Jupiter retrograde periods in a 10-year cycle, and not all Jupiter retrograde periods make the market go down. Why? Because you've got a Jupiter retrograde in a 5-year, which is up, a Jupiter retrograde in an 8-year, which is up. So the market may not go down, or it may only go a little bit down or a little bit sideways. So you can clarify this a lot by saying, we have a Jupiter retrograde, and what kind of year are we in, where are we in the Saturn Jupiter cycle, and then you can pull it all together in that way. So what we had in 1997 was in June 9 to October 8, we had Jupiter retrograde, and the market topped out right in the middle of that cycle. On August 7th, the market topped out during the retrograde cycle, and it's basically been down ever since that point. So it worked just as well this year. We had the Jupiter during the Jupiter retrograde period, and I talked about this with stocks yesterday. You know, if you're going to look at taking profits on your stocks, look at them during that Jupiter retrograde period, just in case it falls a whole lot during that time. Take your profit and then get back in after Jupiter's gone direct and you get your next buy signal. So you can do it on individual stocks, or you can do it on long-term charts. These are periods that I'm just giving you right here just to study. In 1929, Jupiter was retrograde during the big fall. In 1987, Jupiter was retrograde during the big fall. In 1989, Jupiter was retrograde during the fall. In 1989, you had a fall, but it didn't compare to the 1987. 1990, Jupiter was retrograde in the fall, and March 1994, Jupiter was retrograde in the fall. And you can say 1997, Jupiter was retrograde. Now, when we had the actual big move down, Jupiter had just gone direct this year. It was not, but it was retrograde at the point that we topped out. So here I have it for you. 1989 fall was 300 points. Now, if we hadn't had that 1987 fall, that 60-year cycle that we talked about earlier, we'd have thought 300 points would have been pretty bad at that time. But you know how life changes. You know, here we are at these dizzy heights in the Dow, and the 300-point fall is just an everyday thing where, you know, we're not even interested in it. So things do change. Your large graphs that you have give you the Jupiter retrograde periods. And you have one of your charts right now that we'll look at, which is one of the little charts that I gave you, which is basically your large chart reduced down. It should be the next one in your stack. It says at the top here, planetary retrogrades and direct geocentric chart 2A at the top. Okay? And I have just colored up on here, and I have put Jupiter there. Actually, Jupiter is right here. So we'll cross that out, we'll say Saturn. And these are the Jupiter retrograde periods right here. I'm just doing them up in green for you. Jupiter retrograde periods. And so these are the Jupiter retrograde periods shown. When the planet is moving down, that's when it's retrograde. When it's moving up, that's when it's direct. When it's moving down, it's retrograde. Up, it's direct. So you have charts for the whole century in your stack, in your big roll here. So again, you can just quickly look at a year. You look on here, say Jupiter was retrograde during the, you have the months listed on the bottom. Jupiter was retrograde on any given year from this month to this month. Did my chart go down? I bet you in 5 minutes you can do just about every chart in your stack and see if Jupiter affects that commodity or stock, and just by looking at your big graphs. And so 1998 is the next one we're concerned with, and Jupiter is retrograde from July through November next year. So that would be a period of time that we could see the market go down next year. So we want to write that down. We'd make a list of things that would be happening. That will be one of them. There's another way for you to see the Jupiter retrograde periods. You can see these on your graphs if you put on the Jupiter lines. For example, when these lines are moving down, now this is in your handout today. This is chart 1 of your handout. And when the Jupiter lines are moving down, Jupiter is retrograde, and when they turn and go up, Jupiter is direct. So chart 1 of your handouts today, you have a stack of handouts, a big pile of handouts. There you are. Chart 1 shows you very clearly on your chart Jupiter retrograde. In the Galactic Trader, you can print out this graph without the chart on it. You could print out this graph for 1998 and see your Jupiter retrograde period and have it for the next year. So we can see that very clearly on our chart number 1. Chart number 2 gives us the Jupiter retrograde periods, and I have got the Jupiter lines at 12 degrees apart on this, which is half of the 24. I put it at 12 degrees apart, if you'll notice up in the top corner. And the reason I've done that is to make this beautiful spyglass formation, that I call it. And it's either a spyglass or an eyeglass, but it's pretty much a spyglass because it's like looking at something in a very clear way. And during these periods, when you have these Jupiter spyglass formations, you will see that you will have 2 major lows form during this period of the market. For example, right here you had a low form, and right here you had a low form, and so you had them forming in this area, and it told you these were the lows of the market coming in at that time. So we've got a whole slew of charts here to look at and see this exact situation. So I'll just go through them quickly because I've got a lot to cover. And here we again had the big fall. When was it? Right in the spyglass formation, and came right down in these low areas. And we had first low, second low, and the market never took out those lows. This is the low of the next series starting, which will be on our next page. But what we're going to look at is this pattern over and over again of lows forming in the spyglass area. That's all we're going to be looking for. Makes life very, very easy. So when you have your chart set up in advance and you see that spyglass area forming, you're going to be looking for lows. We saw the first low of this combo on the last chart, and here's the second low right here. Here's the first low and the second low in this spyglass formation. So you're going to see it over and over again, the same pattern. You're looking for these areas, prices in the Dow Jones, to make you a nice low. Whoops, wrong thing. Next one. Okay, another chart. In the spyglass formation, first low, second low. These lows were never taken out. And this is the thing that you want to make yourself the rule on. These lows are not taken out. These are the lows that are in for the next period of time. Now, if you feel the need for it, I will go through all of the other charts like this. Or do you have the picture on that? You got the picture? Anybody need for me to go through any more of these? Because we can move right on to the next thing. Yes?
Can you go down to a lower time frame and still use that kind of pattern by that pattern?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to do that shortly. We're going to do just that. Going down to a smaller time frame and using exactly the same thing. So we will not go through all of these charts then, because you can look at them at your leisure. We'll look at the latest chart we have, which is $1997, because of course that's the most interesting one that we're involved with at the moment. And here we're in the spyglass formation, and we've had low number 1 and low number 2. So it basically tells you this low should not be taken out now, that we have seen our low now for the year, because it occurred in that spyglass formation, and it should be not be taken out. Just over the last several months, I've done several lectures, and last year we talked very much about this low coming in here, which we'll go into this more in a few minutes. We'll get to that point. We talked about this low coming in here, and what I had said was once this low came in, that in October we should see a low that should not take this low out, that could come down and possibly be a double low with this, would be the worst that would happen. But the more probability was that it would not come down that far. We'd have the low, and then we can move on to our 1998 period, which is moving into an up cycle. Take it out. It means price should not go down under that. Taking out a low means here you have the low and price comes down under that low and gets under it. That's taking out that low. In other words, it's not an important low anymore. There's another low that is more important. Yes, and it says here that these lows should not be taken out. We've looked, if you'll go through all the charts that you have in your stack there, and you've got a bunch of charts, and what do you have this bunch of charts for? You have this bunch of charts to prove to you that it worked in the past. I didn't just put these charts in there for fun. I put them in there to show you on a backtrack that this thing has worked over many years' time. Because if it doesn't work over many years' time, as I said to you yesterday, it's absolutely no use to you. This chart you don't have. This chart I'm just going to show you, but you can use the last chart you're looking at, and you can write, let's see if you have that on there. You probably don't. But so you can just write this down. And because I'm just going to tell you something about this chart, which is another Jupiter thing, and we're talking about Jupiter. It's one more Jupiter thing that is very, very interesting. And that is, we're looking here at the Jupiter square. That symbol is for a square, and that other symbol is the north node. And that's a point. I don't know if Thomas talked to you about it. If he didn't, well, I'll get him to. But this is the planet Jupiter squaring the north node, or 90 degrees away from the north node. And when Jupiter is 90 degrees away from the north node, you get this pattern. Let me show you this one first. Here we had, because of the retrograde, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had about 5 dates there when we had a square of Jupiter to the node. But what happens with Jupiter squaring the node is that at that time you get a high, then you get a low, and following the low, the price goes up, takes out that high of where we started, and goes up significantly. Let's go down to this one. We only had one Jupiter node aspect at this point. There was the Jupiter node. We had a high in that area. The price went down, came back up, took out that high, and went up significantly. You can look at any chart back from the 60s even, and you will find that this worked with great regularity, like 95% of the time. This was an important thing. And I have one other chart to show you on that right here. This is, because, you know, before in the early 60s, the Dow was very piddly, nothing happening. We didn't move very much. Here's another one. Here was the aspect, moved down significantly, took out this high, and had a significant move up. So this is the pattern whenever you have a Jupiter node aspect, and all you have to do is ask the computer to put on all your charts the Jupiter squaring the node aspect, and it will do it, and you can research it yourself and see that once this high is taken out, the market will move up significantly into new highs. The next aspect of this is March 20th, 1998. So we'll be watching for this pattern, start looking for this pattern to occur. Moves down first, and then it moves up. In fact, since the early 60s, there's been a couple of times where it moved down just a little bit and then took off up. So it doesn't have to move down always as significantly as it has in these charts, but still, that's the pattern. It moves down some, and then it takes off and goes, but you watch for the takeout of the high. That's the thing that you're looking at. And once that's taken out, then look for it to move up to new levels. Right here. March. It's going to be a square. 2098. That's your next aspect. So it should go slightly down. Could it only go a small amount down, go up, but and it could go quite a bit down and then go up.
When you say taking out that previous high, that's the one that the north node was squared to?
Yes, the date, the high is going to come right around the date of the node, and within a week, 2 weeks either side of that, you're looking at that time frame. What's your major highs around that? That's going to be the high that you're looking at. But we're going to get into some other cycles that are going to even work with this even better. We just want to put our attention on that for the moment.
This is on all stocks, right?
Yes, this naturally.
So we sell
What?
out on March 1st, and we go to cash, and
Well-
when it crashes, we buy.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to crash very much, because sometimes it's only gone down a minuscule amount some of the time, and then it's taken off up. 98 is an up year, so you know you might not have much in the way of a crash. In a 9-year or 1 year, it could, you know, if it occurs, as you see, it doesn't occur every year. It's like a 2.5, 3-year period, so it's not occurring all the time. So you need to look at the year that it's occurring on. This all makes some difference. But that would basically in itself just signal to you that the market very well from that point could go up significantly, especially until 1999.
But there are some stocks that do follow.
Oh, absolutely. There are some stocks that don't follow what we're looking at here because they have Saturn in their chart, in their individual chart. Those stocks are down because of their own personal cycles. It's just like all of us. I can say as a general trend we could all be doing better during this period because the economy is up. However, you have Saturn in your chart and you're not doing well at all. You just lost your job, you just had to move to another area because you got kicked out of your house and so on and so forth. I just know. No, but so, you know, the markets, the stocks are the same. When you start looking at individual stocks, not all stocks are going to go up. This is the point of looking at the stocks on the stock trader and getting the printout of the stocks. Because although the market went up a certain percentage from January through to August of this year, not everybody made that percentage on their stocks because they might have had stocks that went down because they didn't look in, you know, with the planetary and find out which were the best stocks. And even the planetary doesn't always give you everything, but it gives you more, you're more ahead of the game. You have stand a better chance of getting the ones that will be going up. And if the market isn't in an up cycle, you have to have an edge. You have to have something to tell you which stocks are going to go up in a down cycle in the market.
You should always look at each stock individually when you're ready to trade it and see if it travels with the index. Sometimes you'll find that they travel inversely to the index, and that'll tell you an awful lot too. You know, if you're looking at bread and butter stocks, and you find that you might find that some of them go up when the indexes go down.
Exactly. So looking at them individually when you come to trade them, it's your money. Pay attention and do the extra homework. Anyway, our conclusions, which is pretty much you want to pay attention to the September and November period of any 9-year, and we have that coming up very soon. You want to pay attention to the eyeglass formations on the Jupiter retrogrades. You especially want to watch the Jupiter retrograde periods in the years 0, 2, 4, 7, and 9. And now we want to look at the smaller cycles that are going to be helpful in bringing our timing into a closer date. And we've already, I think, given you these Jupiter dates of Jupiter retrograde in 1998 and 1999. There you have your Jupiter retrogrades. Okay, so the next thing that we want to look at is the Mars cycles, because the next planet in the solar system closer to the Sun is Mars, and Mars cycles are going to time it even more closely.
When were those two Jupiter retrogrades?
Mine should be on
Oh, okay, you can't see that far into the future on the trader thing.
You could.
Yes, you can.
You should have yourself an ephemeris anyway, a book. The book ephemeris, you can look out and you can see the retrograde periods.
What we're going to
all at
show
once.
as soon as we get through with this is we're going to come over here to Thomas on the computer, and we'll just show you how to do the retrograde periods for next year, and you can print it out. We'll show you how to do that. Okay, Mars cycles, short-term cycles. Okay, Mars has a yearly cycle. What I'm going to be looking at is heliocentric Mars. And the reason I'm looking at heliocentric Mars is because if you look on your next sheet that you have, which is this handout that I gave you, this particular sheet, it says at the top, page 3A, 1926 to 1932, of the extra little handout sheet, you will see the cycles of Mars. And the cycle I have colored in red, the dotted line, is the heliocentric line. And the reason I use this cycle is because this cycle works with the market bottoms. In other words, when we come down from the opposition to the conjunction, and we're looking at Mars with the Sun, and heliocentrically it's Mars with Earth, and so when it comes down into a conjunction with Earth, we get a bottom cycle in the market. When it goes up to an opposition with the Earth, we get a top cycle in the market. When it comes down to the bottom, we get a bottom cycle in the market. And this is a very regular cycle, and it's approximately a yearly cycle that you will find absolutely invaluable to you when you are working with this planet.
Okay, so the dark line there, the solid line is Earth, is that right? And the dashed line is Mars?
No, this line is Sun, Mars. That's the solid line, Sun, Mars. The dotted line is Earth, Mars. And the difference is that Sun, Mars is geocentric, and Earth, Mars is heliocentric. And the reason I use the heliocentric is because the heliocentric patterns the market. The geocentric, you see, does exactly the opposite thing, because the geocentric goes up when the market is actually coming down. So that's the reason why I'm not using the geocentric, because it doesn't pattern the market. Now I could reverse that cycle and say, okay, let me do it all the other way around. But then on every other chart you've got, like the Jupiter-Mars, the Jupiter-Saturn that we just talked about, that does the beautiful thing with the geocentric going up and going down from conjunction to opposition, I'd be having some one way and some the other way. And I have tried in your charts to put them all the same way. So this is the reason why I'm saying use the heliocentric, because it absolutely patterns the market as to what the market does.
It's the same. It's the same cycle. The sun from geocentrically is always 180 degrees from the Earth heliocentrically. It's the same, because the two viewpoints are always in opposition.
So on your sheet here, you can just read your sheet, and I will read it along with you as we look at this graph, because it tells you on this sheet exactly what happened. And it tells you starting in 1926, and we're up at 1926, this talks about 1926 here, and it says starting in 1926 that this gave us a time window for a low right here in November of 1926, and the actual low in 1926 came October 26th. October 26th of 26. That was when you got your low. So that low came 1 month from when it was predicted to come. This was during a massive bull market up, but it still brought us in, because remember, we were in this cycle of 1920 to 1929, which is a bull market up. And during that time, we got a low with the Mars cycle, and it brought us a low. It gave us a retracement in that bull market up. Okay, 1927 here, as you have shown on your chart here, said a market top would come. And 1927 is normally a very strong down year. But the Jupiter-Saturn cycle was up to 1929. The Mars cycle was up, and so you had a top right here. The top came in October of 1927, right here where we had this top shown. The top came, and then October, 7 year again, the market fell very sharply during that period of time. So it did exactly what we've had this year. We were in a strong market up, and the market fell very sharply. 1927, same thing. 1928 called for a bottom right here. And the top came at the end of November, and the market fell very sharply into this bottom here that was predicted for, here it is, predicted for December. And it could have come anywhere in November, December, or January, because we have a month time window on this. And the bottom came in December, right around this particular cycle. Does that remind you of what happened in 1997? Because actually this very cycle predicted a low for you in March of 1997, and we went right up to almost the cycle coming in before it crashed into it. Same thing happened in 1928 that we're just talking about. It waited until almost the last of the cycle before it put it in. On your next sheet you have 1929. In 1929 that you see went into a market top. So what did you have right here? It was a 9 year. It was the end of a 10-year cycle up. You had the Mars cycle topping out with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And you had also your 60-year cycle on top of that. Everything came together to give you a top right here. So all the major cycles that really work on the markets all came together to give you a top right there.
What day did the market actually crash?
It was, I think the top was September 3 or something like that. And then October was the big crash. Now let's look at your next sheet you have. You have a sheet for 1997 where we had that market 87, thank you, 1987. And 1987, and this is on your page 26, the information that goes with this sheet is on page 26, so if you want to write that down, page 26, you had the top of the market, the Mars top of the market was for 825. The top of the market was 824. I mean, this one was right on. This one was interesting also because if you look down, you have the Venus cycle, which also gives you a top of the market. Now we'll look down at the next level of the Venus Earth aspect, also gave you a top of the market. Then if you go down and you look underneath that, and you'll see this is the Mars-Venus cycle. Both the Mars-Venus cycles, they gave you bottoms at that point, but this cycle does not necessarily make tops and bottoms in the same way as these two cycles at the top. These two cycles at the top are top and bottoms of the market. This one just says a big direction change right here. So you have a big direction change right here, falling right in line with this. Then underneath this you have the Earth Mercury aspect right in line with it. Then along with that you have the Venus Mercury right in line with it, and you have finally the Mercury Mars right in line with it. So here is one instance where you have all your cycles lined up together on one line like that, either they're low cycles or they're high cycles, all lining up together like that. Mark that on your chart, because if you see this kind of thing in the future, you want to be aware that this is a big change of direction for the market. You don't always get this kind of thing. Not everything lines up like that. So it's important to look, and this is what the invaluable thing you're going to find out about these sheets are, is that you have these cycles all listed for you in this particular way. Let's look a little bit about how that cycle works out on the chart. Right here, for example, on your chart 10, this is the 1994 period, just to show you how one of these things worked. And for example, the Mars top came in right at this point, and we were coming into the Jupiter spyglass formation, and the Mars top cycle came in. So you knew that within a time window of a month either side here, this market should top out and start moving down. And you also knew that you had this period coming in here where you would be experiencing two market lows, and those lows should not be taken out. This begins to give you a very clear way of making predictions, especially when they fall as nicely as this. Sometimes they don't always fall like this. Occasionally you're going to get them doing the opposite thing and almost neutralize each other. But that's a very clear way of seeing it. In our March period, rather, this year, this was our Mars low cycle that we had that came in at this time. It came right in at our aspect right here. We had the low of the market. It came down, it moved up. That low has not been taken out. Now we've had the Jupiter cycle lows come in, and those lows should not be taken out. So we've had two lows now this year, and we know that those lows are our lows for the year. Now, we can't say with a good 99% accuracy that these lows will never be taken out, because occasionally they get taken out. But you've got lists of charts in there. You've got tons of charts in there to look at, and you'll see how often that happens. Very, 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 very seldom. But we'll go on and talk about that. You don't have chart 10? So this just clarifies what we've just talked about. All this chart does now, it's your page 29 in your handout. Your page 29 clarifies what we've just talked about. This is the cycle that we've looked at on our long-term chart here. And what I've done is I've just told you again, Earth-Mars conjunctions to oppositions, the market trend is up. Earth-Mars conjunction, oppositions to conjunctions, the market is down. And then what I've done at the bottom is I've said visually you might want to look at it in this way, and at this point I have switched the geocentric, instead of having it like we have it at the top here of the two separate cycles going in different directions, I put them both in the same direction at the bottom, just to give you a better view of this is really how the cycle is actually going to look. Okay? So that's just visually to give you the cycle of how it's going to look. Your page,
So the solid line is geocentric again, and the dashed line is heliocentric?
well, actually down at the bottom here, it's actually the solid line is the heliocentric and the dashed line is the geocentric, because I already had the heliocentric down there and I just popped the other one on to show it to you. So this is what it looks like now on your page 29 of long-term charts on the Dow. And this just gives you a kind of look at how it all happened. And we see in 1987 you had the top and then the market came down. Then here we had a minor low and then the market went up. It was nothing much of anything, a minor low right here. Here we had a top and the market came down. Here we had a low and the market went up. Here we had a top and the market came down. So these cycles are pretty much following along with what they're supposed to do with the Dow. Now the firm rule is this right here. The firm rule is that heliocentric Mars-Earth conjunctions form bottoms and heliocentric Mars-Earth oppositions form tops. Well, we've gone over it, but I'm just reiterating it for you so that you know exactly what it means. Over on this side right here, it tells you that once the Mars cycle top has occurred, or bottom, but once the top has occurred, let's go through it like this. Once the top has occurred, or been put in as I have right here, but once that top is there, if that top is then taken out, it means the market is going much seriously higher. We had an example of that right here. Here we had the top put in by Mars. It came down following that Mars, and then that top in the later time frame was taken out. And it told you at that point that the market was going very seriously higher, and which it did. And it went on up and it came down, and we've just had that low put in, which is the March low that we've had right there. If that bottom should now be taken out, that market is going seriously lower. So we don't expect that to be taken out. Why don't we expect it to be taken out? Because we're moving now into an 8-year, and an 8-year is generally up. So we don't expect that bottom to be taken out.
Once you're out of the Jupiter retrograde.
Exactly. You've got all of those things, and so we're looking now, the Mars cycle now is up until next year, and it tells you right here that the Mars cycle is up until 598. So we expect basically the market to go up to that point. Then it's down into 499, so you should get a retracement somewhere around the early 99 period. You should have a retracement in the market. And so, and then we have an up cycle in 7 of 2000, and we have a down for 6 of 2001. So you can pay attention to these. So on your charts right here, I have for you gold, and I'm only going to go through a couple and you can go through the rest yourself. Now the low formed right here, this was the Mars low. That Mars low was taken out on gold. And what is the firm rule on that? If that low is taken out, you are going to see it go seriously lower. So as soon as that low was taken out, we knew this market was not doing an up move from this Mars cycle. It was doing an inverse cycle, and it would be moving down. However, we are to move up into an up cycle somewhere in 98 in this. So we'll talk more about that, because I'm going to talk about this chart with you later on. So you have several other charts right here for several other markets that you can see how this works. It works on worldwide markets. It's something that you can make predictions with regularity. What I also have following that on page 34 of your handouts, I have some blank sheets, which you can take those blank sheets and you can look at it and put on the charts for the future years. So those are for you to work with so you can do these for future years. You have them all in there. Your chart number 29 on page 39. This chart just shows you how this cycle actually worked. This is on gold, by the way, and it shows you how this cycle actually worked over past performance. And you can see, basically, you can see this cycle on the chart. And it's just giving you an idea of what you're going to be looking at in the future markets. The next page is what we have just done recently. It came down. We had the top of the cycle. The top of the cycle worked beautifully. It came down. And here it was supposed to go up. It took out that low. And so it hasn't started on its upcycle yet. But it doesn't tell you that it has to start on the upcycle immediately. But the rule was if it took out this low, which it did right here, then it is seriously down. And of course we're making some serious lows in gold, and we want to talk about those later.
Well, that's we can talk about them right now. That's that Mars-Neptune conjunction cycle that we looked at before. That's the cycle that it just has overridden that, so this market shouldn't start going up until right around the Mars-Neptune conjunction, which is coming up very soon. So we're in an up phase on that cycle, so it should be a fairly violent reversal when it occurs.
So now we're looking at, in here, you've got a whole slew of these charts showing you all the different markets that work on this cycle, and I'm not going to go into them. I've just put in up here the Straits Times because we were just in Singapore and we did that one. And let's go straight on to your chart 37 and just talk a little bit about your chart 37. And this is the same chart we just looked at a little while ago, but what I have on here is information about Mars retrograde and direct. And this information on this chart just tells you that also at the time that Mars is retrograde, it tells you information just exactly as the Jupiter retrograde tells you information, just as this gentleman in the back asked us a little while ago. And so here we have the chart number 38, which is showing us the retrograde periods of Mars. These are Mars retrogrades and not Jupiter retrogrades. And you see again, in these retrogrades, we get the same spyglass formations, and lows occurred during those times. We got the 1 low and the 2 low. So this is just exactly the same. And can you imagine now when the Jupiter and the Mars low cycles occur together that you get, very good lows. So this now begins to put another smaller cycle on here. Since we don't have a lot of time, since you can see this very clearly and we've gone over it and you need to sit down and work with it at home, I won't go over the rest of these charts on this Mars cycle. What I will do is I will just show you the 1997 chart, which is your page 53. And we see that we had low 1, low 2 came in during that cycle, and we've been up since. So it said if these lows are taken out, this market is seriously down. And that was the reason why I was very able to predict that although the market should come down in October, because it was a 7-year and October is the market down, I did not anticipate it taking out this low. And since we're in the latter part of a Jupiter-Saturn upcycle of where we should top out coming up over the next couple of years or so, then again, I don't anticipate it'll take out that low. If we're in the down cycle on it, if we were really, bottoming on it, then I would anticipate this low could be taken out. But we're a major long-term cycle, we're finishing the latter end of the upcycle. Okay, so then we want to combine other things. We want to combine, we've looked at them a little bit already, but we want to combine the Mercury and the Venus and the Mars and Earth all together. We want to combine all of these cycles, because when we get the combinations of all of these cycles, this is when we get major market bottoms and major market tops. And so if we look at chart 44, This is my personal chart of how I like to have it done, instead of having the pointy cycles that we've been looking at, which the pointy cycles are the ones that go like that. Instead of doing it like that, my personal charts, I like to do it like this. And what we have on here is, for example, I'm going to color it up in red right here. This is the up and down cycle of the Mars-Earth that we've been looking at. It, instead of doing it up and down, I've done it in a square pattern because I like it that way, but it's just simply exactly the thing that you've been looking at on the highs and lows of, in other words, I could do it this way. I could join this across from here to here, and that would give me exactly the same pointy thing that you've been looking at. But I prefer it this way because it tells me something different. And now I've got the Venus Earth cycles that I put on with this. And the importance of looking at it like this is that it tells you something. I'm not going to tell you. What it tells you is, what does it tell you? Synchronicity. Exactly. What it tells you here is, you see that these cycles, they're apart right here, and they're further apart right here, and they're together right here, and they're together right here. Oh, what happened? Oh. See, you're not supposed to know this. This is the thing. You're not supposed to know. Yes, exactly. But you see right here, these two lines came together. These two cycles came together. They were apart, they came together. They were apart, they were 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 together. That's important when those times come together. What do I say to you at the top of this chart here? Market fall, market fall, market fall, market fall, market fall, 2000. Look at that, 2000, market fall, market fall. So these cycles now begin to pinpoint you very, very closely into just exactly when these things are going to happen. Now, we talked about earlier on, we talked about chunking parts of the market together. And last year, this is the exact chart, as it says down here. This is last year's chart, page 71. This is what we had. And I chunked this market together for you last year, and I told you last year that you would get a low in this point of the cycle, that you would be expecting a low in this point of the cycle. Because, now looking at this chart, you have to look at it realistically. Because my scale on this at the bottom here, and we're not looking at scale, this is on a time comparison, not a scale comparison. So my scale here, and this fall here of the 1997 fall, and then we had a fall right here that lined up exactly with this one. We have a fall right here, and so we're expecting a fall right here. Here the market fell 600 points, and we were talking about a 600-point fall for this time frame right here, which we were predicting on exactly what I gave you just already that we talked about. And so let's look at the market and what happened exactly this year. Here we had a fall, exactly lined up with this fall. This is exactly what I told you last year. We had the charts. If you look in your old books, you'll see you have this exact chart. And we had a fall. This was a 600-point drop. And this was also a 600-point drop in March. But it didn't seem very big anymore. I mean, now our scale is scrunched up so much. Our 600 drop here and a 600 drop there. But we talked about that 600-point drop in March, April period, the 1-month time frame window. We talked about that last year, and here we have it again. So our next question. Yep.
Yeah, what years are overlapping here between the top and bottom?
Okay, if you can you read it on your sheet?
I think I got.
We got 94, 94, and 97. But you don't need to know this, and I'll tell you why. and 96 and 19, it's 96 and 1990 there, 91 and 97. You don't need to know this because I'm going to show you a simple calculation for it. So on your page 59, I've given you a worksheet, one of my own personal worksheets, so you can calculate it yourself without even, because this chart that we're looking at right here is very hard to see. When you say to me, what year is it? Then it's very hard to figure it out, how it's going to work out. But I want to suggest to you that you make yourself charts like this, 10-year charts like this of chunking time frames of the market over each other, and you will see tremendous things, and you will be totally amazed. But I have written it out for you in a very simple way. I've called it my the special cycle of Mars, Venus, and Earth. And so what I've said is you simply add 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days to certain highs and lows, and you are going to get these points. So if you take the 1987 top right here, you add to it 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days, it gives you a bottom is going to form right here at 11/14/1990, and the bottom formed on 10/10/90. You had a big bottom. And I'm not talking fat, I'm just talking big. They didn't get that one. Okay. Out to lunch. Okay, then I'm going to take that date now that the actual bottom occurred. I'm taking that date and I'm putting it down to the next one. And I'm adding 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days. And it told me a top would form on 1/31/94. And from that top that would form at that time, then we would see a big bottom. And the top formed exactly on this particular time. The top was right on, and the bottom from that top, when I added that, well anyway, that was the exact top. The top was there. And then I added this next 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days, and it told me the next bottom was going to fall in 4/15/97. Now, I didn't give you this calculation last year. I just gave you a ballpark on it because I figured, well, you hadn't paid me enough. Yeah, fair enough. So I said March, April, but I'm giving it to you this year. I'm giving it to you. I'm going to give you a lot of other good things, but I'm giving it to you. So now if we take that date and we add to it 3 years, 3 months and 15 days, we get a top to form right here in 2000 with a big fall from that top. And then if we take that top and we add to it 3 years, 3 months and 15 days, we get a big fall to a bottom that's going to occur in 2003.